She was originally a miraculous doctor in the apocalypse, but she traveled through time and became infected with the epidemic. She was also abandoned by the top scorer, Mr. Lang, and soon to be buried alive as a discarded woman. Can she tolerate this? In the blink of an eye, she practiced medical skills and saved the people of the epidemic city with exclusive secret medicines, earning praise from others. Upon hearing the news, the top scorer husband came and saw her crying with joy. "My husband has contracted the epidemic, madam, please save me." She said, "The pit has been dug, walk slowly and don't send it away." My concubine Bai Lian accused her, "As a wife, I do not regard my husband as heaven." She said, "My fate is determined by me, not by heaven." It is said that the dowager is looked down upon by people. The old lady with white hair warned her, "You are just a tofu seller. Becoming the top scorer's wife is already a virtue accumulated by your ancestors. Don't be ignorant, kneel down and admit your mistake. I will show great mercy and let you go home." She said, "Sorry, I don't recycle garbage." After leaving, the ex-husband's family was waiting to see her joke. The wealthy and idle prince spoke up, "I will not marry unless she does." The richest man Shen said, "There is 1,000,000 taels of silver here, please accept it with a smile." Tang Bohu, the world's greatest talent, said, "The top scholar. What are the books he writes? Give him a mirror and let him take good care of himself." "Master, please accept me as your disciple," said the old man, miraculous doctor from the Medicine King Valley, begging her every day. The sword immortal descended from the Tian Shan mountains just to be a small guard beside her. Kai, who once looked down on her, couldn't regret it and cried, begging her to come back. Big shots. "Sorry, my fairy, you can't climb high." Keywords of the novel. After Healy, the divine Dr. Princess Yi flips through the entire capital without a pop-up window. After Healy, the divine Dr. Princess Yi flips through the entire capital. Download the complete set of TXT. After Healy, the divine Dr. Princess Yi flips through the latest chapters in the capital to read. Chapter 1. Live Burial. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Live Burial, and Fupei. Although it was you who sponsored the Xianggong to enter Beijing for the imperial examination, as the daughter of a merchant and the wife of the top scorer for a year, after calculation, the Xianggong's kindness to you is still greater. Look at you, you're so vulgar, you only know a few words, and you don't have any talent at all. When my husband married you, he couldn't hold his head up in front of his colleagues. To be a good person, you need to have self-awareness. If you make my husband so miserable, won't your conscience really hurt? And Fupei was bitten in the neck by a zombie a second ago, and his eyes were pitch black. The next second, he felt a tightness in his chest and something rustling down from his head. She suddenly opened a pair of moist black eyes, and the light flickered in her eyes. What was falling was wet loess, and most of her body was already buried under the loess. Buried alive. A man and a woman's faces flashed in front of me. The man was handsome, cold, and conceited, while the woman was delicate and beautiful, all white lotus. A memory forcefully entered Fupei's mind. A woman with the same name and surname as Fupei was a tofu seller in Anhua City. She admired Kai Siyuan's talent and used 200 taels of silver borrowed from various sources to support him in going to the capital for the imperial examination. She promised her for life, but unexpectedly, Kai Siyuan won the top spot in the exam. Fupei achieved her dream of becoming the top scholar's wife, but on the day of her wedding, Kai Siyuan also took Yi Shir, the daughter of the Hanlin, as his concubine and doted on her in every way. Throughout the year, she never stepped on Fupei's door. Recently, there has been an outbreak of the epidemic in Xuanyang City. This morning, Fupei ate breakfast delivered by Yi Xier, and in less than 15 minutes, he had a fever and rash, resembling the symptoms of the epidemic. Kai Siyuan believed my mistress's words and didn't even invite a doctor. He immediately pulled out Fupei and buried him alive. There is no cure for epidemic infection, and it must be buried alive in order to effectively block the spread of the epidemic. As the Lord of Xuanyang City, I should set an example. Today, I have committed acts of righteousness and personally buried my wife who was infected with the epidemic. I hope the people can follow suit and eliminate the epidemic as soon as possible, returning Xuanyang City to a clean city. Kai Siyuan's words were full of energy and teleported from a distance. The sickly people surrounding the periphery have all lost their color. Kai Zhuangyuan is so righteous and destroys his family, what a ruthless heart. It's a pity that Lady Kai, who is so beautiful, was buried here. Some people also agree with Kai Siyuan. You may not know that although Lady Kai is beautiful, she is only the daughter of a tofu vendor and is not worthy of the title of the top scorer. During the current epidemic, Lady Kai's heroic spirit has broken her wrist. Firstly, to stop the epidemic and repay the emperor's grace. Secondly, to get rid of her lowly original wife. It can be said that she killed 2 birds with 1 stone. As soon as this statement was made, it immediately received support from many people. If the situation continues, one will inevitably suffer from its chaos. This epidemic has been incurable for thousands of years. If the infected people are not buried and the epidemic is allowed to spread, it will inevitably ruin the lives of the entire city. As the top scholar in the world, Kai Zhuangyuan has a good reputation. He sacrificed his wife as a thunderous means to quell the epidemic. Once the epidemic is stopped and he makes contributions to the court, Kai Zhuangyuan will become a new and backbone force in the court, and be promoted to 1 level. As the saying goes, no poison, no husband. In the current pandemic, only ruthless people like Kai Zhuangyuan can use their iron fists to effectively block the epidemic. If we can quickly stop the spread of the epidemic, Kai Zhuangyuan should be the top scorer. Kai Siyuan listened to the praises of the people and saw An Fupei buried, with only 1 head left and a beautiful face exposed outside. He couldn't help but feel a little sad. But he was more proud inside. He stood with his hands down, dressed in a bright red official robe, facing the round and blood-red sunset of the western sky, exuding a sense of tragedy and heroism. He also felt that he could be called one of the few capable officials in governing the world throughout history, and could be called the backbone of the court. However, he didn't know that the current An Fupei was no longer the original An Fupei, and the person who could bury An Fupei alive in the post-apocalyptic zombie era had not yet been born. An Fupei carried his luck and breath. Sure enough, the powers of the apocalypse also attached to An Fupei along with her journey. In no time, An Fupei could leap out of the buried pit. Ah! A scream came from afar, followed by cries. More screams. More crying. It seems that the people have started to imitate and bury each other alive. Outside Xuanyang City, there is chaos. So, Mrs. Kai is certain to die today. That's for sure, said the person around her. Fortunately, she's just a small tofu seller, and even if she dies, she's not worth it. She's not comparable to Kai Zhuangyuan's concubine, who is a daughter of the Hanlin, and her status is much more prestigious. Only when this tofu Shishir dies and gives up her position as a wife, can she help each Yanjin to be upright. That's what matches the talent, beauty, and status of the Zhuangyuan Lang. Kai Siyuan sighed and his emotions were very complicated. Kai Siyuan turned his head, and a few tears flickered in his deep eyes. Madam, I didn't expect you to do a good deed before you died. When you go back, I will ask the emperor for a reward and erect a memorial archway for you. He pursed his cold and thin lips, showing an indescribable disdain for An Fupei. And sure, you were originally the daughter of a merchant, but you were able to become the first lady and even receive rewards from the emperor after death. This is also your fate. At his feet, a maidservant who had been beaten to the flesh and blood was angry, but she cried out forcefully. Madam didn't catch the epidemic at all. She had a rash after eating the congee sent by Aunt E. Madam is poisoned. Poisoned. This is Hua Hong, An Fupei's personal maid. When Enfu broke with his family and insisted on marrying Kai Siyuan, only Hua Hong accompanied Enfu and never gave up. Although Hua Hong was seriously injured, she still managed to climb up to Enfu's side with one breath and used her hands to dig up the soil, wanting to dig out Enfu. Her hands were drenched in blood. Kai Zhuangyuan, you can't treat madam like this. You are ungrateful. Shut up. Kai Siyuan shouted fiercely at Hua Hong, his young and handsome face darkening. Yi Xier, the concubine, leaned against Kai Siyuan and began to sob and cry. Xianggong, I am kind enough to make soup and serve my sister. If my sister doesn't appreciate it, it's okay. How can I slander and poison me? I come from a noble family in the Hanlin and have been pampered since I was young. I have never done such a rough job. But I know that after marrying Xianggong, I should prioritize him. Although Enfu is the daughter of a businessman and has a humble status, she is the original wife of Xianggong. I disregard humiliation and belittle myself, personally serving him. I am truly kind-hearted. Kai Siyuan became increasingly agitated as he listened, his narrow phoenix eyes rolling fiercely. While he was trying his best to share the worries of the court, he didn't expect a small maid next to his wife to drag him down. Is it important for Enfu to be infected with the epidemic? It's not important at all. What Kai Siyuan needs now is someone with a noble and prominent identity, but not so important to him, who can sacrifice for him in order to inspire the people, encourage them to quickly implement his iron-blooded policies, and quell the epidemic. Thinking of this, his wild wolf-like eyes turned into knives and pierced the maid Hua Hong. Cherish the precious treasures of the Hanlin, be knowledgeable and courteous, how can you slander me? He snatched the shovel from the servant's hand and slapped the servant girl Hua Hong on her head. But the shovel was frozen in the air and suddenly could not move. I don't know how Enfu came out of the buried pit. Her body was covered in wet soil, and only her face was fair as jade, like a lotus root just dug out of the mud. She grabbed the handle of the shovel with one hand, twisted it in the opposite direction, and threw the top scorer of Yushu Linfeng out and fell into a mess. With her slender arms swaying in the wind, she didn't know how she operated, so she grabbed Yi Xier's neck and exerted herself fiercely. Yi Xier, whose breath had been taken away, had a face full of crimson ferocity, devoid of any sense of beauty. I have contracted the epidemic, so I need to be buried alive, right? The girl's teasing voice drifted out lightly. The servants digging the pit next to them were shocked and turned pale. Ah! How did she come out? Did she become possessed by gods and ghosts? Kai Siyuan stood up from the mud with one bone and shouted in terror, Enfu, I warn you to let go of her. Enfu smiled lightly, her long eyelashes fluttering, exuding the beauty of spring breeze brushing against the threshold. Don't worry, I don't have a habit of killing animals. It's just a matter of treating others in their own way. The girl curled her lips and couldn't express her teasing feelings in words. She moved her palm up and pinched Yi Xier's jawbone, forcing her to open her bright red cherry mouth. Pate. The girl spat out a mouthful of phlegm, precise enough to fall into Yi Xier's mouth. The girl's finger moved, and Yi Xier's lips opened and closed, involuntarily swallowing phlegm into her stomach. Congratulations, you will catch the epidemic in a day. Xier, please bury yourself alive then. Kai Zhuangyuan will ask the Holy Master to give you a memorial archway. Enfu's lazy voice was full of irony. Yi Xier coughed loudly, her fingers stuck into her throat, trying to spit out the phlegm she had swallowed. She vomited profusely, but in vain. Kai Siyuan widened his eyes and looked at Enfu, his handsome cheek muscles twitching. You. Disgusting. You are indeed the daughter of a merchant, a rough person. Don't worry, there's also your part. The girl's voice was clearly lazy, but her hand movements were as fast as the wind. She had already used the same technique to grab Kai Siyuan. Turning her eyes, the wave of light swept by, and her eyebrows furrowed. Oh, it's too ugly to speak. Kai Siyuan claimed to have the appearance of Panin, but was despised and ugly by Enfupe, and couldn't help but blush with a handsome face. Enfupe, if you want to be shameless, you can speak such words. Kai Siyuan was extremely angry. Of course, his biggest concern was that Enfupe interrupted his plan. He is deeply afraid of any setbacks in his iron-blooded policy. Enfupe said calmly, "Of course I do, but unfortunately you don't. Let's give you the hereditary silver needle to settle down." The girl touched the space bracelet on her white wrist, took out a silver needle that was the length of her finger, and quickly stabbed at Kai Siyuan's 3 acupoints. "Congratulations, live a long life of 100 years, cut off children and have no descendants." Enfupe took 3 shots and directly physically cut, injuring his kidney. From now on, Kai Siyuan will not be able to be a man. But Kai Siyuan had no idea what Enfupe had done to him. After 3 injections, he didn't feel anything at all. He glared fiercely at Enfupe and said, "I advise you to turn around and contribute to the prevention of the epidemic. It's your honor." But Enfupe ignored his good intentions at all, and she lowered her eyes to glance at the dirt pit on the ground. The pit was dug well. The girl threw Kai Siyuan inside. Also, how could it be without Aunt E? Enfupe grabbed E Sierra casually and threw her in as well. "Isn't it about making contributions to the court? Apart from your calamity, it's about making contributions to the court." After the girl finished speaking, she picked up the seriously injured maid Hua Hong and snatched a horse. She raised her hand and lightly hit the horse's buttocks, causing its hooves to rise and fly away. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Meeting the Zay King. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Meeting the Zay King. E Sierra witnessed Enfupe riding on the dust, and her face turned pale at once. E Sierra's assistance in Kai Siyuan's righteous extermination of his family was nothing more than a desire to take the opportunity to eliminate Enfupe, so that she could become his wife. Isn't Enfupe's plan ruined by her departure? E Sierra trembled and rushed into Kai Siyuan's arms, like a frightened little rabbit. "Xianggong, what should we do?" Sister suddenly ran away. Will the people think that Xianggong deliberately let her go? Kai Siyuan is also confused. What happened just now? In his eyes, Enfupe, who was as humble as an ant, and Enfupe, who had no independent opinions, suddenly seemed like a different person. If he couldn't figure it out, he immediately realized something in his mind, which was that the plan to use Enfupe's death to call for an iron-blooded policy in Xuanyang and quell the epidemic had fallen through. How could that be? He is an idealistic and ambitious official who wants to take advantage of the epidemic in Xuanyang to establish immortal achievements for Dayue. Kai Siyuan patted E Sierra on the back and comforted, "Don't be afraid, and sure is just an ignorant woman. The terrain of the nearby mountain roads is complex, and she doesn't know where to run. She doesn't know many people, and no one will help her." Kai Siyuan quickly ordered the officers and soldiers, chase me, catch her." And Kai Siyuan also issued an order that all the people of Xuanyang should go and capture Enfupe. Whoever captures Enfupe, whether alive or dead, will be rewarded with 100 gold coins. The sunset has faded, and under the gloomy gray light, Kai Siyuan's sculptural face is chilly. At this moment, he is not only Enfupe's husband, but also a god of killing. Enfupe, even with wings inserted, it's difficult for her to fly. On the other side, Enfupe whipped his horse and shook off Kai Siyuan's soldiers. The heavily injured Hua Hong was thrown across the horse's back, causing her internal organs to shift and causing excruciating pain. The bone of Hua Hong has been broken by Kai Siyuan, and every bump and fracture will pierce her body again. Husband. Madam, Hua Hong was abducted at the age of 10. Fortunately, she was saved by Madam and has been with her for 5 years. Hua Hong endured the pain and struggled to speak intermittently. In the past 5 years, we Although we are masters and servants, my wife treats me with the same feelings as sisters, and Fu Pei's beautiful face was covered with a layer of frost, and her eyebrows furrowed tightly. She was no longer the original owner, but the memories of the original owner rolled in her mind, and countless shots flashed like lightning. At that time, Hua Hong was only 10 years old, with a pair of wet eyes flickering like a begging little animal. "Sister, I don't have a father, mother, or family. Can you be my own sister?" Poor child, but Fu Pei knows that Hua Hong once had a happy family, only to encounter unexpected difficulties. Fu Pei took her little hand and said, "Of course you are my sister. You and I live and eat together, so we are a family." Hua Hong became Fu Pei's maid, and they had endless words to say every day. Fu Pei was very playful and said, "Sister, the sun is out today. Shall we go to the backyard to swing?" Hua Hong wanted to go, but she bit her lip in embarrassment and said, "But if you don't grind beans, your mother will scold you." "All right, sister, you swing on the swing while I grind beans next to you." Actually, Fu Pei wanted to say that she suggested going on the swing because she knew Hua Hong liked it. "Sister, look at that scholar. He was born so handsome," Fu Pei said. At the beginning of his romance Hua Hong was a bit worried, but he looks gloomy and doesn't seem to have a good personality. Hua Hong's gaze was filled with worry. But when Fu Pei decided to marry Kai Siyuan, Hua Hong resolutely followed Fu Pei. Now Hua Hong is seriously injured and lying in Fu Pei's arms, gasping for breath. Fu Pei wants to find a clean place to heal Hua Hong's wounds. Just walking all the way, a scene of ghosts crying and wolves howling. Everywhere, people are screening each other for who has been infected with the epidemic. Those who haven't been infected should be caught and buried alive, while those who have been infected are scattered everywhere, trying to escape from the mortal world. The soldiers in the city also went out to search and seize the opportunity to extort money from wealthy families. These are all bestowed by the Lord of Kai Siyuan. In the eyes of the original owner, Kai Siyuan, who was as precious as a heavenly god, and the ambitious young Kai Siyuan, were such a troublemaker in the world. If the original owner saw all of this in the spirit of heaven, I wonder if he would feel heartbroken. Anyway, at this moment, Fu Pei's heart was filled with an indescribable sadness. He wished he could go back and poke 8 or 10 big holes in Kai Siyuan's body. However, considering that Hua Hong was seriously injured and groaned incessantly in her arms, she also knew that treating Hua Hong was more important. However, Fu Pei suddenly arrived in this unfamiliar environment, with an unclear road ahead. Searching for the memories of the original owner, his impression of Xuanyang was only limited to the narrow and cramped small space in the backyard of Kai Mansion, and he could not find any useful information. Hua Hong, lying on her horse's back, could also hear the cries of the outside world. With a strong and difficult spirit, she said to Fu Pei, "Madam, Kai Zhuangyuan. Although he is talented, he is not a good person. Aunt Yi is in charge of all the big and small matters in the family. Even clothing and food are in every possible way. I am so hungry." At this moment, Hua Hong's life was on the brink of death, and she said she was really hungry since Fu Pei married Kai Siyuan. Yi Xier also joined the Kai family. "I heard that Yi Xier and Kai Siyuan were childhood sweethearts, and they were the white moonlight in Kai Siyuan's heart. Because Fu Pei once supported Kai Siyuan had to marry Fu Pei due to the pressure of gratitude, which led to the dissolution of the good marriage relationship between Yi Xier and Kai Siyuan by Fu Pei. Yi Xier had no choice but to become a concubine and settle under Fu Pei, naturally harboring hatred towards her. Kai Siyuan appointed Yi Xier as the head of the family, citing her ability to read and write. However, Yi Xier took the opportunity to wield her moral baton, allowing Fu Pei to enjoy the treatment before Kai Siyuan's promotion. She struggled with food every day and almost starved to death after a year. But let's not talk about these things, they have nothing to do with Fu Pei. Fu Pei is not the original owner at all. Although she bears the body of the original owner, she will definitely not let the experience of the original owner affect her next life arrangement. And Fu Pei said, Hua Hong, please speak less. I'll find a place to have surgery for you. Hua Hong didn't know that Fu Pei in front of her had already changed her inner core. She had abnormal chest pain, shallow breathing, and felt that she was about to pass away. She anxiously confessed her last words to Fu Pei, it's better to leave him as soon as possible for Madame's plan. Fu Pei's delicate eyebrows and eyes twisted, while Hua Hong was already severely injured, her thoughts were actually the original owner. Fu Pei said, let's talk about these words slowly in the future. Hua Hong kept her eyes wide open and struggled to look up at Fu Pei. Otherwise, Hua Hong wouldn't have closed her eyes. Fu Pei lowered his eyes and glanced at the small and medium-sized maid in his arms. He said in his heart that not being moved was fake. He couldn't believe that the original owner, who had a romantic mind, could have such a loyal little maid. Since she has now taken care of the original owner's body, she will take good care of this little girl and not let her suffer the same hardships as before. Then don't call me madam, Fu Pei's voice was soft but firm. I will cure you, you won't die. In the apocalypse, Fu Pei was the chief divine physician and a legend in the medical world. It can be said that as long as one breathes a sigh, Fu Pei will be saved. Even if she had already lost her breath, as long as it didn't exceed 6 minutes, Fu Pei could rescue her. Fu Pei touched her right wrist and was glad that her space bracelet had been worn with her. It contained a lot of post-apocalyptic supplies, including daily necessities, medical equipment, and various equipment. With these things, Fu Pei found a suitable place to perform the flower red handicraft. I saw a dilapidated temple on the roadside slope. Fu Pei drove his horse forward, stopped his horse outside the door, and entered the temple holding Hua Hong. This temple is dilapidated, with straw and withered leaves falling all over it. 2 statues sit on a dark earthen altar, and a few rotten offerings and pastries are placed on one altar. Fu Pei blocked the clutter on the altar, spread a cloth, and placed Hua Hong Ping on the altar. First, take out a bag of glucose from the space bracelet and let Hua Hong drink it to replenish her energy. Then, upon palpation and examination of Hua Hong's body, it was discovered that she had 2 broken ribs that had penetrated her lungs, causing her to experience shallow shortness of breath. Immediate surgery is necessary. Fu Pei took out a shadowless lamp, turned it on, and then took out his instrument kit. He was about to undergo surgery when he suddenly heard footsteps outside the door, and a few people touched the temple. One said, "Oh, there is a temple here. I wonder if Ensure will hide here." Another said, "Hurry inside and take a look. Kai Zhuan Yuan has an order. If you catch Fu Pei, you can reward him with 100 taels of silver and provide clues. You can also get 50 taels of silver." A woman said, "A woman like this from a vendor, who is as humble as us, has the opportunity to meet and become the top lady. How unreasonable." Later, a sneer said, "Unfortunately, a grass chicken is a grass chicken. Even if it flies onto a branch, it cannot become a phoenix. Isn't it necessary to be pulled and buried alive?" Suddenly, a person shouted, "Look, why is this temple so bright? Has a bodhisattva descended into this world?" Fu Pei frowned. The surgery required concentration and the most taboo was to be disturbed. Kai Siyuan offered a silver reward to her, allowing the people to search for her everywhere. This was because he had confirmed that his original owner had married him far away, leaving him alone in Xuanyang. Even if he fled for a while, he couldn't find a place to escape. The love of the original owner, who married a distant place like a moth to the fire, became a convenient way for Kai Siyuan to dispose of her at will. Fu Pei disdained it, but had to first collect the shadowless lamp and equipment and flash out of the temple door. I only heard the woman chattering and praying, "Bodhisattva bless me, let me find Ensure and earn 100 taels of silver." Fu Pei couldn't help but sneer, "Tell Kai Siyuan, 100 taels is too little. Am I only worth 100 taels? 1 million taels is not much. The woman only felt a gust of wind passing by her side. And Fu Pei had already taken a step out of the door, jumped onto the horse, and urged it to run forward. Behind them, a few people exclaimed, "Ah, it seems like Ensure just now." "It's Ensure. Go and report to Kai Zhuangyuan quickly." And Fu Pei rushed out 5 or 6 miles in one breath, leaving those few people behind. Due to the severe damage caused by the red flowers, and Fu Pei couldn't bear the bumps, so he had to slow down his horse speed. In the gusts of autumn wind, there seemed to be faint cries of killing mixed in. Being anxious, I suddenly heard the sound of hooves coming from the road. And Fu Pei grabbed his horse belly, and at the intersection, he saw a convoy meandering towards Xuanyang city under the faint moonlight. In the middle, a carriage was exceptionally luxurious and spacious, with more than 10 guards in front and behind, along with servants escorting boxes and cages, and dozens of horses. And Fu Pei's mind twitched as he thought that this carriage would be a good temporary operating room. I saw the carved and exquisite palace lamp hanging in front of the carriage, with the characters Zhe and Wang on it. It turned out to be the carriage of King Zhe Jinyan. And Fu Pei felt a sense of joy in his heart. Since the other party was a prince, he probably wouldn't care about that 100 taels of silver and offered her a reward. And Fu Pei immediately urged the horse forward, stopped the carriage horizontally, and shouted, "Stop." The convoy was stopped, and several guards rushed to the front of the convoy, holding the handle of the knife and watching in Fu Pei with caution. And Fu Pei took a deep breath of air conditioning. Hua Hong trembled and tugged at An Fu Pei's collar. "Miss, they are big shots, we can't afford to provoke them." And Fu Pei patted Hua Hong's back and continued, "Your Highness, I can lend you a carriage as a reward." The carriage was forced to stop, and the body suddenly shook. The two people chatting and laughing in the carriage stopped. These two people, one dressed in a soy sauce-colored silk robe, with a strand of goatee under his chin, were around 30 years old, with an anxious expression on his face. He urgently said, "Remuneration. Do you think King Zhe is someone who lacks money, Mississippi?" Another young man, on the other hand, was leisurely and composed. He was dressed in a shiny and gorgeous tribute soft satin robe, leaning leisurely on the lower part of the carriage. Under his thick eyebrows, he had a pair of beautiful peach blossom eyes, which seemed to be affectionate to everyone. His smooth and fair face was slightly curved with a beautiful lip shape, and his hand, resembling plum bones, was reaching out to the car curtain, about to lift it up and look outside. The middle-aged man hurriedly stopped and begged, "Your Highness, today we are rushing to Xuanyang to treat the epidemic. This is a major matter of the world, and we must not delay it." At the same time, he shouted and ordered the attendants outside the carriage, "Someone, drive this woman aside, and we will continue on our journey." End of this chapter. Chapter 3. To Snatch the Carriage of King Zhe. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. To snatch the carriage of King Zhe, a group of guards pulled out their swords one after another, their sharp blades unsheathed, and their swords hummed with a chilling autumn night chill. And Fu Pei saw that these people were all burly and agile, clearly possessing martial arts skills. However, she was already at a loss. Xuanyang was Kai Siyuan's territory, and this carriage from outside was her only hope, or rather Hua Hong's only hope. And Fu Pei turned her gaze to the skinny man driving the carriage, and saw his big eyes flickering with a hint of sympathy. She squeezed her horse belly and approached the driver, saying, "This young man, I can guarantee that your prince is healthy and painless." The young man remained silent, but slightly withdrew his whip from behind and did not follow orders to set off. Suddenly, a middle-aged man wearing a soy sauce-colored silk robe emerged from the carriage and impatiently asked An Fu Pei, "Can you protect King Zhe from illness and pain throughout his life? Are you a doctor? Do you know who I am?" I am the head of the imperial physician at the imperial hospital and the renowned physician, Yan Wang's subordinate seizure. I am also a disciple of Ji Ruhu, Zheng Chaozong. What kind of illness can I not cure? With me, Jing Chaozong, why does King Zai's body need to be manipulated by others? And Fu Pei raised his eyebrows slightly. How can a talented doctor in this era compare to her doctors from the 23rd century? I saw Emperor Zheng Chaozong's lips press down, showing a look of disdain. Miss, don't bother. Every year, you approach the Prince of Zai in various ways. There are many women who want to become the Princess of Zai. But what an elegant figure the Prince of Zai is, how could she be tempted by worldly women? Miss, let's just die of this heart. Originally, Emperor Zheng Chaozong regarded An Fu Pei as a foolish flower lover who blindly pursued the King of Zai. King de Yueza, the ninth son of the Emperor of Yu, is said to have disliked politics but enjoyed business. He had a lot of silver and was deeply favored by the emperor. He was handsome and free-spirited, which is why many women in the capital loved him. However, although Prince Zai is charming, he has no intention of starting a family or establishing a household. He only likes to fight chickens and walk dogs, wandering around the mountains and rivers. An Fu Pei saw this person contemptuous of him, with a haughty attitude that made him angry. It seems that if she doesn't show her strength, they won't believe her. An Fu Pei glanced at Zheng Chaozong and was already well prepared. He asked, but does Dr. Zheng know that he has contracted the epidemic? Zheng Chaozong snorted and said, I have contracted the epidemic. How could it be? I came specifically from the capital to Xuanyang to rescue the people from the epidemic. After a pause, Zheng Chaozong mocked and said, Miss, I see that your cheeks are turning red and you have a slight rash on your face, which means you have contracted the epidemic. No, it's not right. An Fu Pei said calmly, the rash on my face is caused by urticaria caused by accidental ingestion of toxic substances. And Dr. Zheng, you have a slight involuntary twitch on your right cheek while speaking. Dr. Zheng knows that this epidemic will first invade the nervous system at the beginning of its onset, which is why this symptom occurs. I can assert that in less than 3 hours, Dr. Zheng will inevitably have a fever. I kindly request that Prince Zai reduce his contact with Dr. Zheng. Zheng Chaozong's pupils suddenly shrank, and a cold sweat appeared on his back. What the girl said was exactly what his master Ji Rohu said. He immediately realized that after the outbreak of this epidemic, it was extremely fierce. There were infected victims in the towns and villages near Xuanyang, and it was already the boundary of Xuanyang. Since he had rushed to Xuanyang, it was not surprising that he had contracted the epidemic on the way. Fortunately, his master had already given him a prescription to fight against the epidemic, so there was no need to panic. Zheng Chaozong was surprised that the person in front of him, who was covered in mud, also understood medical skills. His heart was weak and his tone weakened a bit. I wonder what the purpose of borrowing a carriage is, Mississippi. An Fu Pei didn't hide anything. I need a secret room and give my maid a knife. Zheng Chaozong's expression was as if he had been stabbed by someone. Do you want to be stabbed? His master Ji Rohu once boldly attempted a caesarean section to treat ulcers, but either the patient died of excessive bleeding during the procedure or died of postoperative fever and cold exhaustion, without success. Is what this girl says about surgery the same as what he thinks about surgery? No, it's impossible. If there are other medical techniques, Zheng Chaozong may trust her, but surgery is an extremely complex medical technique that involves too many key points. Even his master, who has been practicing medicine for decades, cannot master the art of surgery. The woman in front of him is so young, and she is still like this. Zheng Chaozong examined An Fu Pei again and saw that she was dressed in coarse cloth, covered in mud, which had already covered her original color. Her hair was also covered in mud, and she looked like a beggar. He judged that she was mostly a disaster victim who had escaped from Xuanyang, and in order to save her life, she fabricated this heinous lie. Zheng Chaozong thought of this and felt extremely angry that he had been deceived by An Fu Pei. He had to rush to Xuanyang to treat the epidemic and had no time to deal with such opportunistic and clever women. Zheng Chaozong extended his foot and kicked the driver's buttocks. Xiaoxi, hurry up and drive the car. If it delays the fight against the epidemic, 10 heads won't be enough for you to chop it off. Zheng Chaozong immediately lifted his leg and walked into the carriage. Xiaoxi looked at Enfu-pei in embarrassment and had no choice but to pick up the whip and hit the horse's buttocks, and the carriage set off again. The other guards, wielding knives, forced Enfu-pei towards the roadside. Enfu-pei watched helplessly as the carriage passed by, while Hua Hong's hand, which was originally holding Enfu-pei's arm, seemed to have loosened. Is there really no one in this world to help her? Enfu-pei became anxious and shouted, "People can leave, please leave the carriage behind." The guards gathered around Enfu-pei and said, "Dare." They could take action at any time. And Enfu-pei reached out to the space bracelet, ready to take out an apocalyptic weapon. Suddenly, King Zhe in the car shouted, "Stop." The carriage suddenly stopped again. Immediately, a tall and upright young man suddenly lifted the curtain of the carriage, got out of the carriage, stood at the front of the carriage, anxiously looked back, and at a glance, caught a glimpse of Enfu-pei. The two eyes met. Enfu-pei's heart was filled with joy. There was a turning point in the situation, and this man was willing to help her. Looking at the palace lamp in front of the carriage, Enfu-pei saw the king of Zhe, whose body was like a jade tree, dressed in a jade-colored tribute silk robe, with hair tied and a purple gold crown embedded with treasures, exuding an extraordinary aura of luxury. His facial features were pure and handsome, like a piece of beautiful jade, meticulously crafted and flawlessly perfect. At this moment, King Zhe's peach blossom eyes were staring at her for an instant, shining like a 1,000-year-old ice pool, deep and invisible, reflecting her embarrassment. "Are you Enfu-pei?" King Zhe exclaimed in astonishment. Enfu-pei was surprised. Although the seemingly gentle and jade-like King Zhe appeared on the surface, she carried a sense of emptiness and loneliness. She didn't know why she felt this way and asked, "Do you know me?" King Zhe's hand caressed his chest, and there seemed to be an extra tremor in his voice. "Then get in the car," he said. Zheng Chaozong was startled and poked his head out of the carriage. "But we're in a hurry to go to Sun." King Zhe gave him a stern glare and said, "You, get out of here." When he turned to Enfu-pei again, his gaze was extremely gentle, as if looking at a rare treasure. "Miss, please." Several guards withdrew their swords, their faces full of confusion, and bowed to Enfu-pei. "Miss, I offended you just now." On the contrary, Enfu-pei hesitated. Why did Prince Zhe show disdain before and then show respect? How does he know his own name? Is it because of Kai Siyuan? Does he know Kai Siyuan? He wants to release himself to Kai Siyuan. Enfu-pei retreated instead of advancing. "Your Highness, do you know my husband Kai Siyuan?" The peach blossom eye of King Zhe suddenly shook, and his tongue seemed to be enveloped. "You. Have you married?" Enfu-pei furrowed his brows, feeling the emptiness and loneliness that had returned. It was as if Zhe Wang was walking in a deserted wilderness for hundreds of years, finally seeing a living creature. As he approached, he discovered an invisible barrier separating them, making it impossible for him to touch them. Enfu-pei shook his head and drove out these unrealistic feelings from his mind. The man in front of him showed such a surprised and regretful expression, at least indicating that he was not with Kai Siyuan. Enfu-pei immediately said, "Yes, but he's a jerk. He wanted to bury me alive and even beat my girl to death. I escaped from the burial pit." King Zhe lowered his eyes and saw the dirt on her body. His expression became a little colder. His deep eyes were like bottomless whirlpools, containing all his emotions. His words were also cold. "Who makes you confused?" Enfu-pei felt very wronged. It was the original owner who couldn't distinguish people clearly, and what was the relationship with her? But now that she had borrowed the body and identity of the original owner, she had no choice but to sneer and nod. "You're right, so can you borrow my carriage? You won't tie me up and give me to that bastard, will you?" King Zhe glanced at Enfu-pei and clearly felt his hatred in his heart. Sure, but I have a request. I borrow your carriage, and you have to accompany me for the night, he said. What? Nfupei's body shook for a moment. Rumors are right, the Zhe king is indeed a lecherous person. Seeing that Hua Hong has fainted again, if she drags on any longer, she will die. Nfupei gritted his teeth, as long as he was willing to help her with Hua Hong. Okay, you look good, I won't lose out, he said. King Zhe's face darkened with a solemn expression, showing no signs of happiness. Instead, he became even angrier. I never thought you were such a casual Nfupei. Nfupei thinks that Prince Zhe is mentally ill. Isn't he taking advantage of the situation and forcing her? She said angrily, that's right, that's how I am. Are you borrowing a car or not? Nfupei decided that if he beeped again, she would take out a machine gun and shoot them all. Anyway, she had a wide variety of post-apocalyptic supplies stored in her space bracelet, everything. Don't provoke me. King Zhe's face turned black like the bottom of a pot, and he said in a muffled voice, I promise 1,000 gold, and it's best if you do the same. Don't go back. He then turned around and prepared to enter the carriage. Zheng Chaozong was in the front of the car and stopped King Zhe. Your Highness, this woman cannot have had surgery. She lied to you. Do you dare to bet? If she saves this girl, you'll call her Grandmaster in the future, said King Zhe with a stern face. Zheng Chaozong scratched his head and couldn't figure out how well Prince Zhe could help Nfupei speak. What if she doesn't know? Can you pour me a urinal, Prince Zhe? King Zhe snorted without hesitation, I will castrate you and send you to the palace to become a eunuch. With that, he kicked Zheng Chaozong off the carriage. Zheng Chaozong fell so hard that he couldn't be prepared for it. He got up and touched his buttocks, frowning in frustration, but Prince Zhe, let's hurry to Xuanyang to treat the epidemic. King Zhe fell silent, all the people in Xuanyang have died. What does it have to do with this king? Facing the murderous gaze of King Zhe, Zheng Chaozong was shocked and scared. He seemed to no longer recognize the King Zhe in front of him. Isn't the King Zhe the most charming and unforgettable? Why is it so cold today? Something's wrong. King Zhe showed no concern for Zheng Chaozong and glanced at Nfupei. Get in the car. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Living in a room with the lone son and widow of King Zhe. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Living in a room with the lone son and widow of King Zhe. Nfupei hugged Hua Hong and flipped over to dismount. Xiao Si stepped forward and helped Nfupei. Nfupei gratefully said, thank you, little brother. Zheng Chaozong rubbed his buttocks behind Xiao Si and looked at Nfupei as if he were looking at a demon that harmed the country and the people. He was full of complaints and said, the lives of hundreds of thousands of people in Xuanyang are delayed for you alone. Nfupei met Zheng Chaozong's melancholic little eyes and felt that this person's resentment towards her was unreasonable. You are an imperial physician, right? You have a prescription for fighting against the epidemic, right? Since you have a prescription for fighting against the epidemic, why don't you bring the prescription to Xuanyang to treat the people yourself? It's only 40 or 50 miles to Xuanyang, and your hands and feet are growing on you. It's not that I use the carriage of King Zhe, so you can't leave. Zheng Chaozong was scolded and left speechless. Although he has a prescription for fighting the epidemic, there is a 500-year-old ginseng in the prescription that is extremely expensive and cannot be eaten by ordinary people. Zheng Chaozong deliberately deceived King Zhe into sending him here, hoping to continue deceiving King Zhe into paying for the epidemic in Xuanyang. Of course, these words are difficult for him to express clearly at present. If he says them, King Zhe will definitely not do it. The silver needed by hundreds of thousands of people and ginseng in Xuanyang is an astronomical number. Zheng Chaozong thought that he would first arrive in Xuanyang and let Prince Zhe see the plight of the disaster victims, perhaps to deceive Prince Zhe into generously donating money. Unfortunately, Zheng Chaozong's plan was interrupted by Nfupei. Zheng Chaozong couldn't help but feel annoyed, his face extremely embarrassed. and he angrily rebuked, "You know nothing." Of course, Anfupe didn't know there was such a big conspiracy behind her. Anyway, she couldn't be scolded by Zheng Chaozong for no reason, so she said, "Who made you fart with your mouth?" With the help of Xiaoxi, Anfupe carried Hua Hong into the carriage of King Zhe. I saw that the carriage was extremely spacious, with a bed in the front, covered with brocade mats, and a short table on the nearby stool, which was both warm and luxurious. This carriage is much cleaner and tidier than a dilapidated temple, spacious and with curtains hanging down that are not ventilated. It has good privacy and is suitable for temporary operating rooms. Anfupe is very satisfied. Anfupe placed the maid Hua Hong flat on the bed, pulled her hand, exposed the blood vessels on the back of her hand, and took out the needle from the spatial bracelet. He first injected Hua Hong and hung it with salt water. Afterwards, she collected her blood and compared it to her blood type. Unexpectedly, Hua Hong turned out to be a panda blood type. Fortunately, Anfupe's bracelet contained 2 units of panda blood. Anfupe quickly transfused blood into Hua Hong first, and then prepared surgical supplies for emergency surgery. Otherwise, the more blood Hua Hong lost later, the less blood she could replenish, which would be troublesome. King Zhe leaned sideways on the slope, holding his head in his hand and his eyes wide open, unsure of what he was thinking. After a while, he suddenly asked, "Did you just say your husband is Kai Siyuan?" His tone was quite harsh, with a provocative tone like, "Come and argue with me quickly." Anfupe was busy preparing surgery for Hua Hong, but didn't have time to argue with him. "So what?" King Zhe continued to ask, "Is it Kai Siyuan, the lord of Xuanyang city?" "Yeah." Anfupe couldn't help but turn his head and take a glance at King Zhe. He saw his fair and warm face, but his gaze was cold, emitting a suffocating low pressure. Strangely, King Zhe showed no concern for the drugs and needles he took out of space, nor did he show any strange expression. Instead, he was constantly entangled with the character Kai Siyuan. "Kai Siyuan was the top scorer last year. You've chosen a good husband," said King Zhe with a tight jawline and a harsh tone. "The smell of gunpowder is pervasive, and the acidity is also quite strong." Anfupe was lost in thought. What exactly does Zhuang mean? He's jealous. He likes himself. Does he like the original owner? Does he know the original owner? Anfupe searched for memories, but could not find any memories where the original owner intersected with him. Speaking of Kai Siyuan, Anfupe remembered the sharp face of Kai Siyuan, who held on to Yi Xier with arrogance, but treated her like an ant and a stepping stone. Anfupe couldn't help but blurt out, "It was chosen by the original owner. Don't let me bear the blame, okay? It's really unlucky to have this happen as soon as I come across it." King Zhe suddenly sat up straight and fixed his gaze on Anfupe, as if to lift her up and make her reveal all her secrets. The original owner. Carrying the blame. Anfupe only realized that he had slipped his tongue and quickly saved it. What I mean is, I just want to be beautiful alone now. What's wrong with being a top scorer? Let him go with the wind and leave him without a trace." Prince Zhe carefully savored her words. After being stunned for a long time, he suddenly laughed. But it's not a happy smile, but a desolate, schizophrenic smile. His deep peach blossom eyes, when smiling like this, have a unique beauty. Anfupe always feels like he knows the original owner. After a while, King Zhe stopped laughing and lay down on the couch. His mood seemed to relax a lot, so he propped up his head and leisurely watched Anfupe's movements. His gaze was very gentle, as if he had changed someone else. He said softly, "Do you want to change your clothes?" After finishing speaking, he leaned out and opened the cabinet under the bed with his long hands. He took out a package and threw it towards Anfupe. Anfupe opened the package and found a set of delicate purple women's jackets and skirts inside. There was actually a woman's clothes on King Zhe's car, and indeed the reputation of being promiscuous was well deserved. I don't know which woman wore them, but Nfupe rejected it and threw them back, saying, "I don't wear anyone else's clothes." King Zay said, "It's really sentimental. This is new, no one has worn it, it's specially prepared for you." He threw the clothes over again. Nfupe was surprised. There was a faint scent of starry flowers on the clothes, which was indeed her favorite flavor. Even the color of the clothes was also her favorite, light purple. She couldn't help but wonder, "Do you know me? How could it be? This is the first time I've seen you." Zay Wang denied with a stern expression. "How do you know that I like? I have read countless women, and once I see a woman, I naturally know what she likes." "Is that so?" Nfupe fainted to death, and King Zay was truly a scumbag with no shame at all. The clothes on her body are really dirty and uncomfortable to wear. If she doesn't change them, it's not conducive to sterile surgery. Nfupe hugged his new clothes and said, "Then you can get off the car." King Zay refused and said simply, "No. How can I change clothes if you don't get off the car?" Nfupe really suspected that King Zay asked her to change clothes not out of kindness, but for the sake of seeing things. It was really abnormal. But King Zay tilted his head and said, "I won't look at you." Nfupe couldn't believe him. The man seemed to have eyes behind him. Seeing Nfupe's suspicious gaze, he reached into his arms and took out a handkerchief. Next, he covered his eyes with a handkerchief and tied a knot in the back of his head. He then lay down with Nfupe on his back, his hand supporting his head, and said leisurely, "I am a vulgar person, not a vulgar person." Nfupe stuck out his tongue, feeling that he was suffering from a mental illness. Taking advantage of the fact that King Zay was not looking at her, she quickly took off her dirty clothes and put on her new coat and skirt. "I didn't expect these clothes to be very complicated, with loose underwear and tight outerwear." Nfupe struggled to put them on for a long time, and was afraid that King Zay would suddenly turn his head. By the time he put them on, he had already sweated profusely from the heat. Nfupe put on his clothes, and Prince Zay pulled off the handkerchief from his face. He only glanced at her, and his peach blossom eyes were filled with a smile. "Fool, you're wearing the wrong clothes," he said. Nfupe actually put the waistband on the outside, and stuffed the quilt inside the waistband, revealing the crooked collar of the jacket. It seems that the jacket was not fastened properly. At this moment, King Zay was even more convinced that this Nfupe was not the other Nfupe. King Zay stood up and walked towards Nfupe, reaching out to tidy up Nfupe's clothes and put them on neatly. "I don't want Nfupe to shrink and fold his hands in front to make a defensive posture." King Zay's hand withdrew again, she no longer knew him. He covered his chest, where there was a distant amber photo hidden, which had been rediscovered from ancient ruins. "Ha!" King Zay smiled and sat back. Nfupe wiped off the dust on her face with a handkerchief, put down the bun on her head, combed it again, and neatly tied a ponytail. She put on a surgical hat and hid all her hair inside it. At this point, a small portion of the blood bag that was transfused to Hua Hong had already hung. Nfupe tore open some floral clothes, exposed her wounds, and disinfected her. Out of the corner of his eye, Prince Zay was staring at her without hesitation, showing a greedy expression of, if he doesn't see her today, he will die tomorrow. Nfupe was like a light shining on her back. During the surgery, someone kept watching her like a supervisor, which was very uncomfortable. Nfupe thought for a moment and asked, "Your Highness, can you do me a favor? I need an assistant for surgery." King Zay was stunned for a moment, then showed a sinister smile and said, "You can help, but there is one condition." Nfupe was taken aback. This Zawang wouldn't make any pathological demands, would he? Just wanted to say forget it. King Zay said, "When the flowers are ready, you can go with me to a place." "Where is it?" "You'll know when you go." At this moment, King Zay is quite kind. He is handsome, sunny, like a big brother next door, and his eyes are pitch black, harmless to humans and animals. And Fu Pei breathed a sigh of relief and said, "It's also very simple on my end. You can help me pull the hook later." So she disinfected King Zay's hands and assisted him in putting on the surgical gown. And King Zay seemed to enjoy the feeling of her changing clothes for him, obediently for a moment. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. In ancient times, was it necessary to commit oneself in this way? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. In ancient times, was it necessary to commit oneself in this way? Zheng Chaozong, who was driven off the carriage, circled around the carriage like a donkey grinding a mill and muttered to himself, "Do you think that woman is undergoing surgery or seducing the king of Zay? He never believes that besides his master, there are other people in this world who can undergo surgery. Moreover, the maid was injured so badly. If An Fu Pei could save her like this, wouldn't it mean that An Fu Pei's medical skills are even higher than his master's? His master is known as the Yanwang's henchman snatching people, and is the leader of the Medicine King Valley. The Emperor of Yu bestowed the name Medicine King on him and also honored him as the Old Divine Doctor. Zheng Chaozong absolutely believed that his master was the most powerful doctor in the world. So he felt that An Fu Pei must be getting closer to the Zay King in a different way. With this in mind, he reached out and knocked on the carriage, pleading, "Your Highness, let me in. Even if you're really undergoing surgery, it's against the rules for a solitary man and a widow to live in the same room." Rules. Zawang's domineering voice came from inside the carriage. "The rules are all for you and your courtiers to abide by. What does it matter to me?" Zheng Chaozong's lips twitched and he said, but, Your Highness, what you're doing will provoke gossip." "Does it really provoke gossip?" Zheng Chaozong couldn't understand how much joy the voice of King Zay sounded. What was going on? "Since it's a source of gossip, I'll marry her." Speaking this sentence, not only Zheng Chaozong was surprised, but also all the guards of King Zay's jaws were startled. Is this still the King Zay who only looks at beautiful women once? Isn't King Zay claiming to never marry until he finds that person? However, the more shocking person is An Fu Pei. She was assisting King Zay in putting on sterile surgical gowns, and with one force of her hand, she tore off one of the straps. He stood with his back to her, tall, and she was only about his shoulder level, but he didn't appear slender at all, but rather symmetrical and majestic. A male aura rushed towards her, and An Fu Pei was momentarily stunned. "Zawang. You're not serious, are you? Do you want to repent?" Zawang's voice was low. An Fu Pei really fainted. Was the ancient men's and women's defense so strict? She's just borrowing a car, but he wants to marry her. No wonder at the beginning, King Zay refused to borrow her car. But why is the corner of King Zay's eye slightly raised, with a pleasure of secretly taking advantage of it? Haha. No, what I mean is that a marriage without emotions will not be happy. Do you have a strong emotional connection with Kai Siyuan? King Zay turned his head and glanced down at the knives, causing the air pressure inside the carriage to drop. An Fu Pei's stomach is full of slander. This person is really sharp-tongued, knowing that she was almost buried alive by Kai Siyuan just now. Her gaze met his, as if in a fierce battle. It seems like she has been defeated. After all, she wants to borrow his car for the flower surgery, and also needs to borrow someone else to block Kai Siyuan in case he comes over and catches her. What I mean is, before getting married, we need to cultivate some emotions first. But seeing a layer of mist in the dark paint of King Zay's eyes, he looked very aggrieved. After a moment of silence, he replied, "Okay. Give you 1 month, is that enough?" An Fu Pei really doesn't understand this person. But forget it, let's just leave him alone. 1 month for 1 month, let's procrastinate for now. She neatly matched the blood types, transfused, disinfected, draped, and prepared for surgery for the flower red. Zheng Chaozong is still chattering incessantly. "Let me go in, Your Highness Prince Zay. This is also for your good." Although your highness agrees to marry this woman, after all, you have not married this woman yet. Since you are unmarried and alone, it is not appropriate for you two to live in the same room. If your highness really doesn't want to let the grand physician in, why don't you hang up the car curtain so that everyone can see you too? That's fine. Endless. And Fu Pei couldn't bear it anymore. Dr. Zheng, are you trying to observe how I performed the surgery? Yes, that's true. Zheng Chaozong had a strong feeling that you were a roundworm in my stomach. I don't believe you can perform surgery, he said. To prove it, you'll put up the curtains and let me watch. Maybe I can even give you some guidance. I won't show it to you. And Fu Pei answered cleanly and sharply. Zheng Chaozong said foolishly, why is this? And Fu Pei said, when you become my disciple, I will teach you. King Zhe sneered. Zheng Chaozong snorted and said, I am a disciple of the medicine king Ji, who is known as the Yanwang's henchman snatching people. I will never call you grandmaster in this lifetime. Did you forget the bet you made earlier? As long as I save my maid, you'll call me grandmaster. Humph, wait for the next life. King Zhe lazily interjected, it doesn't take a lifetime, at most 2 hours. The surgery will be completed. The meaning is that after 2 hours of surgery, Zheng Chaozong still had to abide by the agreement and call on Fu Pei ancestor. Zheng Chaozong paused and said, Your Highness, how are you talking to this woman? As he was speaking, a large light suddenly shone out of the carriage and landed on both sides of the road, shining like daylight. Zheng Chaozong opened his mouth in shock and said, What's the situation? Why is it so bright? Due to the immense brightness inside the carriage, the figures of Zhuang and Fu Pei were clearly projected onto the curtains on both sides of the car. Now, Zheng Chaozong could see Prince Zhe standing at the other end of the carriage, with his hands folded on his chest, far away from Fu Pei. A bag hanging in the middle, with some liquid dripping from it. Zheng Chaozong stared at the boss and said, What is that thing hanging on it? What is that thing hanging on top that drips? What is that thing hanging on top that drips? Due to Fu Pei having started surgery at this time, there is no time to talk to him. Zheng Chaozong asked 3 times in a row. Blood, replied King Zhe on her behalf, blood. Miss and gave the maid a blood transfusion. What? No way. Zheng Chaozong is about to collapse. His master Ji Rohu once tried to transfuse blood into a person based on the medical book sent by King Zhe, but it directly caused the person to shiver and die. From this, his master concluded that injecting blood into another person not only fails to revive the other, but also has a serious reaction, leading to the death of the other person. Zheng Chaozong felt it was over, the maid was going to die. He knocked on the carriage and said to Fu Pei, Miss, different people have different levels of status. If you dare to inject someone else's blood into your maid, it will be incompatible and cause her to die. Fu Pei's tone was flat, I know, the blood I gave her was of the same blood type and won't hemolyze. Zheng Huzong is extremely strange. What is the same blood type? The maid didn't shiver or have a high fever, and her limbs were cold. Not really, said King Zhe. Zheng Chaozong was puzzled. This girl had already solved the problem of blood incompatibility. Is her medical skills really higher than his divine physician master Ji Rohu? He attached great importance to Fu Pei for the first time, but he didn't expect her to actually undergo surgery. She was really cute just now. I saw Fu Pei and Zhe Wang, their bodies tightly intertwined, their heads pressed together, looking at the same place. King Zhe held something in his hand, while Fu Pei held a very small knife in his hand, gesturing and gesturing. The two of them are indeed undergoing surgery. Suddenly, King Zhe lowered his head and the two figures intertwined on the curtain. Zheng Chaozong's voice trembled, what happened? Zhuang said, I accidentally cut a blood vessel, and miss and tied it up with a thread. What, tie a blood vessel with a thread? Zheng Chaozong broke through the defense again. He remembers one time when his master operated on a seriously injured warrior, and the warrior's blood vessels ruptured, causing a torrent of blood. Although his master poured him many hemostatic drugs, the warrior still bled to death. Use thread to tie blood vessels and stop bleeding. Zheng Chaozong slapped his thigh, which was a good idea, but he never thought of it. Not only him, but also his master didn't expect it. By the way, Enfupe is a woman, no wonder she came up with the idea of these needles and threads. And both his master and he are big men, so naturally they won't pay attention to the work of pinching needles and wires. In the blink of an eye, King Zhe and Enfupe regained their previous standing posture. From the shadows falling on the curtain, Enfupe held some strange instruments and made some strange movements. Zheng Chaozong asked in confusion, "What are you doing now?" King Zhe said, "Miss An nailed the broken bone with a nail and wrapped it in a clamp." "Is that so?" Miss An. Enfupe remained silent. King Zhe said, "My lungs have also stopped bleeding. Dr. Zheng, I see that Miss An's medical skills are far superior to yours. You should give up." Zheng Chaozong was really curious about how to nail a broken bone or wrap a splint, he couldn't imagine it at all. Through the car curtain, he couldn't see anything. Just looking at a shadow aroused his curiosity even more. How exactly did Enfupe undergo surgery? He really wants to go inside and take a look. As soon as his hand reached out to the car curtain, he immediately remembered the terrifying look on Zhuang's face, which was about to devour people. Moreover, the guards are also watching from the side. Zheng Chaozong's hand was put down again. But he is a doctor, and when he meets someone with superior medical skills, he can't help but itch his eyes, hands, and heart, wanting to see and learn. I really want to see it, ah. Suffering. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Your lady is inside the king's car. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Your lady is inside the king's car. I didn't expect King Zhe to get on the road and do whatever he was asked to do. He has a strong ability to accept new things. Even though King Zhe saw so many strange devices, he remained calm and did not show a particularly surprised expression. He remained calm and composed with every move and gesture. Enfupe thought, no wonder this man has been loved by so many women in the capital, and indeed getting along with him feels like a spring breeze. Night. The waning moon sinks to the west. Kai Siyuan led a team of soldiers to find the trace of Enfupe. Behind him, surrounded by groups of epidemic victims, holding torches one by one, were magnificent, at least 1,000 or more. Kai Siyuan rode a chestnut steed and stopped at a distance in front of the carriage. His eyes wandered around before landing on Zheng Chaozong and arching his hand, asking, "Have you seen a woman with another injured girl passing by from here?" Enfupe, who was in the carriage, shuddered. For a doctor, encountering zombie attacks during surgery is really a nightmare. Although Kai Siyuan outside is not a zombie, there is no doubt that she came to disturb her surgery. The broken bone of Hua Hong has been replaced, but the pleura has not been repaired yet. This part is extremely important for the recovery of Hua Hong. King Zhe snorted coldly, "Is this your good husband Kai Siyuan?" Enfupe replied, speeding up the movement of his hands. When Zheng Chaozong saw Kai Siyuan's expression was not good, he panicked for a moment and said, You. Who is that little lady from?" Kai Siyuan was extremely angry and arrogant. "Don't try to hide it, I saw the horse she was riding on," he said. Zheng Chaozong became increasingly nervous and suddenly remembered the bun that Enfupe had combed. The man in front of him was probably her husband, which was terrible. Zheng Chaozong couldn't figure out how to conceal it. And when Xiaoxi Xiaowu saw Kai Siyuan's posture, he grabbed his body and stopped in front of the carriage. At this moment, the lazy voice of King Zhe could be heard saying, "There's no need to hide it, Kai Zhuangyuan, your wife is in my king's car." What? Kai Siyuan's voice trembled as he also saw two figures landing on the car curtain. Kai Siyuan suppressed his anger and said, "Unsure, it's disrespectful to disturb the prince like this. Come out quickly. In a moment, I apologize to the prince on your behalf." At the same time, he said to King Zhe, "Your Highness, to be honest, my wife has already contracted the epidemic. It's better to quickly let her off the car to avoid infecting your Highness. Is that right?" Prince Zhe spoke coldly. "Miss Rannan said she had eaten the unclean food made by your concubine and was just allergic." Outside the car, Kai Siyuan turned his head and glanced at Yi Xier beside him. Yi Xier tearfully said, "This must be because my sister is afraid of death, that's why she made such an excuse. How could I possibly give her unclean food?" Yi Xier is the adopted daughter of Yi Hanlin. She is wearing a moon-white long dress with poetic beauty on her belly, looking like a white lotus flower. She is gentle and weak, and doesn't need to say more. Just take a glance at her, and you will feel that she is wronged. Upon hearing this gentle voice, Kai Siyuan felt extremely distressed. "Your Highness, do not believe in Anne's words. To be ashamed, she comes from a humble background and was originally the daughter of a tofu vendor. She has become a deceitful person, and her words are not very true." Cough. King Zhe felt a surge of blood and energy, and she was actually the wife of such a person. There was a faint pain in his chest, and King Zhe turned his head to look at Enfupe, who was buried in surgery and seemed accustomed to these words. "How did I hear that Kai Zhuangyuan was once stranded in Anhua City, struggling and in dire straits? It was Miss An who supported you, gave you silver, and sent you to the capital to take the imperial examination. That's how Kai Zhuangyuan views your benefactor today." A year ago, Kai Siyuan got married, and King Zhe even had the butler accompany him, but he didn't know that the girl he was marrying Kai Siyuan was actually the person he was looking for. Kai Siyuan said again, "It is precisely because Ensure has shown kindness to Kai that Kai, regardless of her humble background, married her and made her the top scorer's wife, enjoying all the glory. From your tone, it seems like marrying Miss An is a charity for her. I heard that last year, Kai Zhuangyuan married his beautiful wife and concubine on the same day. For some reason, he only saw the concubine carrying a large sedan chair, without knowing where his wife was. At that time, Yi Xier and Enfupe passed by on the same day. Kai Siyuan, because he despised Enfupe's identity, only gave Enfupe one title, and the marriage was arranged. Instead, Yi Xier carried a large sedan chair and entered through the main door, blowing and beating. Officials and colleagues came to congratulate him, thinking that Yi Xier was the legitimate wife. Today, Lady Kai was almost buried alive after eating something that my concubine was allergic to, and her maid was severely injured. Such a way of repaying kindness is truly unique. Since you despise Miss N's humble background, why did you marry her back then? Since you have already married her, you should respect her. Today, I won't say that she has an allergy due to eating my concubine's unclean food. Even if she really falls ill, you should not abandon her and ask a doctor to treat her. Why did you bury her alive? Are you spoiling my concubine and destroying her wife?" Kai Siyuan insinuated, "It's not that Kai is ruthless, it's only because the government doctor diagnosed her with an epidemic that she is like this. Your Highness should know that this epidemic has been incurable for thousands of years, and once infected, he will undoubtedly die. Moreover, it is highly contagious. If the infected person is not treated, it will spread the epidemic. I am also thinking for the sake of the country and the country of Dayue." Kai Siyuan's expression became passionate as he spoke. In his heart, he felt that his actions were righteous and selfless, like the backbone of the country. He was much stronger than a wealthy and idle prince like King Zhe who only knew how to rely on his royal relatives to idle around. Enfupe listened to the two of them talk about everything they had and didn't have, all of which was in the past. It was annoying, so he simply said, "Kai Zhuangyuan, there's no need to say anything more. Prince Zhe has already agreed to marry me, and my affairs will have nothing to do with you in the future. Get out of here quickly." Don't hinder my surgery. As soon as this statement was made, everyone present, one by one, was shocked. King Zay's face darkened and he said, "What are you saying? Just now, you said to yourself, if I really know how to operate, you'll marry me. If I don't, you'll kill me. Do you want to go back on your word?" "Humph, I'm afraid you still can't bear to part with that person surnamed Kai." "How could that be? Have you ever seen someone throw garbage and go pick it up?" Kai Siyuan was so angry that his muscles twisted and his face was almost deformed. "Ungshi. You don't know shame. You two, a lonely man and a widow, are living together in the same room. What did you do?" Although Kai Siyuan was determined to bury Fu-pei alive, he also treated her as his personal property and did not allow anyone to touch her. King Zay sneered, "Extremely frivolous, oh, a lonely man and a widow, living together in the same room. What else does Kai Zhuangyuan think can happen?" End of this chapter. Chapter 7. She really healed her. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. She really healed her. Kai Siyuan saw the figures of Fu-pei and King Zay clearly fall on the car curtain. Although they did not meet, they were still very close, and almost everyone present heard Fu-pei's words. "I don't know shame." Kai Siyuan looked as if he had been struck by lightning, his face turned pale, and he gritted his teeth as he shouted to the soldiers, "King of the Tang dynasty, insult my wife and kill me." Zheng Chaozong hurriedly stepped forward to stop him. "It's absolutely necessary. Madam and Prince Zay just shared a carriage and didn't do that. Isn't it, Your Highness Sawang? Please explain it to him quickly." King Zay snorted, "I didn't do it today, I will do it someday in the future." Kai Siyuan's face was still hanging, holding a long bow in his left hand, raising his left arm, and pulling the bowstring in his right hand, he fired a virtual arrow towards the carriage. "Take it for me." Those soldiers knew that the car was King Zay, but they didn't dare to take action. The people behind were ignorant, but they all turned red-eyed and shouted, "Capture ensure alive." They rushed towards this side, shouting loudly. Seeing a bloody battle, Zheng Chaozong stood up and hugged Kai Siyuan's thigh. "It's absolutely necessary. A husband doesn't have a wife." Zheng Chaozong saw Kai Siyuan holding Yi Shir in his arms and said, "This one, give it to King Zay. Don't you still have a beautiful woman in your arms?" Kai Siyuan kicked Zheng Chaozong away and said, "How could this be so unreasonable? Couples, how can we compromise? Why can't she let it go? Anyway, she doesn't love you either. She's infected and must be buried alive." "Ah, why should one be buried alive after being infected with the epidemic? Of course it's to prevent the spread of the epidemic. Otherwise, there's no other way." "Yeah." Zheng Chaozong saw that Kai Siyuan was wearing official clothes and turned out to be the lord of Xuanyang City. "You came just in time. Our imperial physician has a prescription for fighting the epidemic. Let's go back to Xuanyang City to treat the people." "It's too late. The arrow is already on the string, we have to shoot." Kai Siyuan raised his arms and shouted to the people behind him, "My humble wife is inside the carriage. Whoever catches her is contributing to the prevention of the epidemic, and I will reward her with 100 gold coins. If he wants to stop the epidemic and become a hero in Dai Viet, he must implement a policy of killing infected people. If he does this, he must first kill his wife Fu-pei. In fact, it's not really about Prince Zay and Fu-pei sharing the same room, but just give him an extra excuse." Kai Siyuan shouted several times again, "Reward 100 gold." The sound shook the valley. Those disaster victims were originally mixed with many thugs, and those who were afraid of getting infected with the epidemic all followed Kai Tian's words as a tribute. Among the disaster victims, it is unknown who started, picked up a stone and threw it towards the carriage. The horse in the carriage was startled, let out a hissing sound, and ran forward wildly. The carriage behind him became unbalanced and bumped up and down. Enfupe was caught off guard, his fingers trembled, and the vascular clamp fell off, injuring a blood vessel. Blood gushed out from the surgical opening. Horse, continue to gallop forward. The carriage was bumpy on the road, with two people inside swaying and swaying. In this situation, it is very difficult for Enfupe to continue the surgery. Although most of the surgical procedures have been completed, they are stuck in the final closing stage. Zheng Chaozong was very chaotic at this moment and chased after the carriage in terror. Your Highness, do you remember 200 years ago, when the epidemic broke out in the state of Chen, and the people rebelled, the ruler of the state of Chen was delayed and died by the epidemic victims? King Zhe sneered, do you want me to bow down to Kai Siyuan? That's exactly what it means. After all, hiding someone else's wife in the carriage is your fault first. King Zhe did not answer, but burst out laughing several times and then ordered the guards to say, Shao Si, beat me hard, beat me to death. I'll hold on to you. Zheng Chaozong felt that King Zhe was simply absurd. It was worth it to meet a woman by chance. Moreover, this woman was already the wife of Kai Siyuan, and King Zhe was unreasonable. For a moment, the guards of King Zhe and the soldiers of Kai Siyuan engaged in a close combat, clanging and clanging. The guards of King Zhe were all highly skilled in martial arts. Upon receiving the order of King Zhe, they let go of their hands and feet to fight, and suddenly knocked down the soldiers. Xiaoxi also knocked out the two soldiers who were entangled with him, flew onto the horse, grabbed the reins, controlled the horse, and the carriage came to a steady stop. Enfupe took advantage of this opportunity to speed up the movement of his hands and quickly suture the surgical opening. Kai Siyuan saw the soldiers fall one by one, while the candles in the car were still shining like the moon, casting the shadows of Enfupe and Zhe Wang on the curtain of the car. Kai Siyuan raised his whip and urged his horse to move forward. He swung his spear forward and lifted the car curtain. But before he could take a closer look at the situation inside the car, a big hand held the gun head in the car. Somehow, Kai Siyuan had already released the long gun in his hand. King Zhe broke the spear in half and threw it underground. Kai Zhuangyuan, you're showing off. Are you going to rebel? Zheng Chaozong got up from the ground and saw King Zhe dressed strangely, wearing a water blue hat on his head and a water blue mask on his mouth and nose, leaving behind a charming pair of peach blossom eyes. He wore a green robe on his back, with a lot of blood on the front and gloves on his hands, which were also bloody. Ah! Are you flirting in the car or killing someone in the car? Zheng Chaozong rushed into the carriage, only to see Enfupe dressed similarly to King Zhe inside. Zheng Chaozong had not yet figured it out when suddenly the maid lying on the bed lifted her head and looked at Zheng Chaozong in confusion. She said, have I arrived at the underworld? Zheng Chaozong was startled and frightened when he saw the maid speak, oh my god, this is a person or a ghost. And Hua Hong was also startled by Zheng Chaozong's reaction. When she turned around, she saw Enfupe standing beside her, squinting at her. However, Hua Hong was saddened and said, miss, have you also died? Woo-woo, miss, you have a hard life. Woo-woo. But it's also good. When we reach the underworld, I am still with the little sister. Miss, Hua Hong still serves you. Enfupe smiled and lightly touched Hua Hong's head, a gentle expression flowing from her clear eyes. What, you're living well. I said you wouldn't die if I didn't let you die. Miss, don't lie to me. I'm already a ghost now, my body is numb and I can't move. That's the strength of the anesthetic, it's not urgent, it'll be fine in a while. Zheng Chaozong never expected to see such a scene when he lifted the car curtain. Hua Hong has really been saved. Zheng Chaozong and his master have failed numerous surgical attempts. But Enfupe succeeded. There is really someone in this world who can perform such a surgery. Too shocked, Zheng Chaozong seemed to have been acupointed and couldn't move anymore. King Zhe gave him a white glance and said, Dr. Zheng, you lost. Hurry up and call your ancestor. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Also gives you a shot of the virus. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 also gives you a shot of the virus. Kai Siyuan loudly said outside the car, "Anfupe, I advise you to come out on your own." Anfupe lifted a corner of the car curtain, lifted his eyelashes, and saw a young man in a red official robe sitting proudly on a jujube red high horse in front of the car. This is Kai Siyuan, the beloved husband of the original owner. His cold and thin eyebrows and eyes always exude a aloofness and arrogance. In his arms, he still held a pink-clad woman who looked soft and weak. This woman is precisely Kai Siyuan's beloved concubine, Ishir. Kai Siyuan led a pair of personal soldiers behind him, all carrying big knives, each with a fierce and evil spirit. On the distant mountain top, the dense torches in the forest illuminated the entire forest. Smoke billowed, and people gathered below, estimated to be thousands of people in the forest. Kai Siyuan said, "If you go back with me now, you can still retain the reputation of your #1 scholar's wife and fight for a chastity memorial archway for your family. Otherwise, even if you live in the world, you will be a slut and make people laugh. Anfupe, you don't obey women's morality, and you will lose my face." Anfupe couldn't help but snort coldly. Kai Zhuangyuan thinks he still has face. Hua Hong, who had just completed the surgery, struggled with the anesthesia and loudly questioned Kai Siyuan, "Have you forgotten Kai Zhuangyuan? When you were in Anhua City and in dire straits, it was my young lady who supported you. You said she was kind, you said she was beautiful, and you said she would be a couple for a lifetime." Kai Siyuan pursed his lips tightly on the horse, with a hint of malice in his eyes. Anfupe knows that he hates people mentioning things before he became the top scorer. He is the most talented young man in Dai Viet, and his early poverty was the only stain on his life. Back then, he had to endure humiliation and accept the original owner's support, and indeed gave the original owner a solemn oath. For Kai Siyuan, he was completely forced to do it, not from the bottom of his heart. However, when he showcased his talents and was selected as the top scorer, he felt proud in his life but had to endure humiliation and marry his former owner again. Because he cannot be scolded and ungrateful by people all over the world. However, after marrying the original owner, he felt ashamed again, thinking that the original owner was the daughter of a small vendor and could not stand the stage. How could he be worthy of this great talent? He always feels like others are pointing fingers and mocking him behind his back. At this moment, Hua Hong brought up old stories, clearly revealing his scars. Kai Siyuan clenched his fist tightly with one hand, and his handsome face was also tense. At this moment, Yi Xier, who was holding on to Kai Siyuan's arms, cleared her throat and said, "Hua Hong. The Xiangong married your young lady and has already repaid her kindness. Sister only gave the Xiangong 200 taels of silver. Are you going to spend your whole life clinging to this matter and making the Xiangong embarrassed?" Yi Xier's voice sounded soft and weak, especially sincere. In the firelight, Anfupe could see a moving expression on Kai Siyuan's face, probably moved by Yi Xier's words. "So, you must bury me alive, so as not to see me next to you and constantly remind Kai Zhuangyuan how destitute he was back then." "Nonsense, the reason why I want to bury you is because you have contracted an epidemic. This epidemic is incurable, and if you do, you should be buried alive to avoid infecting others. Today, not only you, but also other people who have contracted the epidemic should be buried alive." Kai Siyuan pointed to the magnificent people behind him, who were surrounded by many people infected with the epidemic. After Kai Siyuan buried Anfupe, he also wanted to bury those people alive. "I am righteous and selfless, treating everyone equally regardless of who has contracted the epidemic." King Zhe suddenly sneered, would Kai Zhuangyuan not have contracted the epidemic himself? Will Kai Zhuangyuan invite himself into the pit at that time? Kai Siyuan pursed his lips and coldly hooked up, "This is nature." The reason why Kai Siyuan is so tough is because he is 90% confident that he will not be infected with the epidemic. He once injected a drop of genetic preparation obtained by the Yi family from ancient ruins. The ancient ruins are extremely mysterious and powerful. With just one drop, Kai Siyuan, who was originally powerless, miraculously enhanced his physique and gained explosive power that martial artists could only obtain after 30 years of practice. With this adventure, he firmly believed in his strong physique and would never contract the epidemic. So burying some victims of the epidemic is no psychological burden for Kai Siyuan, as they are just ants. If my official is infected with the epidemic, I will not stay in the world and harm the people. Ha, Zhe Wang sneered. Kai Zhuangyuan should remember today's words. Kai Siyuan sat on a horse with a straight posture. In terms of appearance alone, Kai Siyuan is indeed not bad. Due to Nfupei receiving the memories of the original owner, now Nfupei can clearly feel the palpitations of the original owner towards him. In autumn, he sat under a fiery red maple tree reading a book, wearing only a thin grey cloth autumn coat. His majestic body had a straight back, and his serious appearance seemed to blend into a painting. At that time, all that remained in the original owner's mind was a line of poetry he heard from the play. The young master is unparalleled in the world, and the stranger is like a jade. Unfortunately, the original owner only saw his gorgeous appearance and did not see his inner indifference and cruelty. The original love is love, there is nothing to regret. If he doesn't love her, he can simply say, give her a piece of paper and a book, one is different from the other. But he didn't, as he said he wanted to repay her kindness and insisted on tying her up. At the same time, he despised her and imprisoned her in the backyard. Be both upright and upright. When she was buried in the pit by him, all she had left was hatred towards him. Very good. King Zhe's words gave Nfupei a hint, and Nfupei took out an anesthetic gun from the space bracelet. However, Nfupei's anesthesia gun is not filled with anesthetic, but with a large dose of epidemic toxin. To treat others in their own way, we should also let Kai Siyuan taste the taste of the epidemic. I saw the car curtain moving lightly, and only one eye was visible inside. It wasn't too bright yet, and I couldn't see clearly what was pitch black inside the car. Nfupei pressed the anesthesia gun and fired a whole dose of epidemic toxin. Kai Siyuan only felt a slight tingling pain in his thigh, thinking it was late autumn when there were still living insects biting him. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. The King Only Can Heroes Save Beauty. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. The King Only Can Heroes Save Beauty. Kai Siyuan was indifferent to the slight pain in his thigh. He snorted coldly, since you're not coming out, bury it on the spot. He grabbed his horse belly and ran back, directing the disaster victims to continue throwing stones and bury them on the spot. With Kai Siyuan's command, the disaster victims went crazy, like a carnival, eagerly picking up stones from the mountains, throwing them towards carriages, and onto the road. This is a depression, with apricot groves stretching upwards on both sides, and the middle road being the lowest. For a moment, stones were scattered all over the head. A natural large pit on a low-lying road. The disaster victims held on to both ends of the road. In such a situation, let alone Nfupei, I'm afraid that Prince Zhe will also be tricked and killed here. Stones of all sizes roared down from above. The disaster victims were furious and didn't care if there was a royal relative, nobleman, or King Zhe below. Anyway, they just grabbed the stone and threw it down. Kai Siyuan also made up his mind that if King Zhe dared to touch his wife, he would put King Zhe to death. At that time, the emperor would investigate and he would shift the blame onto the disaster victims. Kai Siyuan quickly drove his horse up the mountain and stood on a hill, his official robe swayed by the fierce autumn wind. In front of him, a wisp of grey dawn was slowly rolling over the mountains to the east under the heavy pressure of the clouds, enveloping the valley here. Zheng Chaozong hid under the carriage and shouted loudly, Kai Zhuangyuan, are you even going to kill Prince Zhe? Prince Zhe has not been infected with. Before he could finish speaking, he was hit on the forehead by a rock. Bang! Zheng Chaozong's head was knocked unconscious, and the sky and earth were spinning as he looked out. At this time, the carriage had become the preferred target for the disaster victims, with most of the stones thrown at the carriage. Accompanied by the sound of the wind, another stone quickly hit Zheng Chaozong. Suddenly, Zheng Chaozong's ankle was grabbed and his entire body was dragged back uncontrollably. Bang! The stone fell on the ground 1 inch in front of Zheng Chaozong's forehead. Zheng Chaozong was sweating profusely and turned his head in a daze. He saw that the person who saved him was Enfupe, holding Hua Hong in one hand and his foot in the other. He has turned around and is still concerned about whether King Zhe has been infected with the epidemic. Zheng Chaozong found that the girl was calm and did not have the same psychological qualities as her age. But after all, this is the king of Zhe. Are you reasoning with a lunatic? Everyone leave the carriage. Enfupe shouted, grabbing Zheng Chaozong's foot and swinging it to the side, throwing it onto Prince Zhe. King Zhe, keep an eye on your imperial physician. King Zhe was forced to catch Zheng Chaozong, but he furrowed his handsome brow again. I only know how to save beauty with heroes, but I haven't really hugged a man. King Zhe turned around and handed Zheng Chaozong to Xiaoxi, ordering him to keep an eye on Dr. Zheng. Xiaoxi pursed her lips and said, but I also want to be a hero. Zheng Chaozong felt dizzy after being turned around a few times. Suddenly, a huge stone flew toward Xiaoxi, shouting the wind and hitting her arm. Ha! Accompanied by the sound of bone cracking, Xiaoxi let out a loud cry and shook his arm. This arm could no longer exert its strength. Zheng Chaozong fell off Xiaoxi, but his feet were still hanging on her. The sky has collapsed, Zheng Chaozong said in a daze as the earth spun around another guard. Tai Song quickly stepped forward to help. The disaster victims on the mountain became bolder and threw larger and larger stones, even pushing down the giant stones that surrounded them from the mountain. Even the guards of King Zhe are all experts, and even stones with big fists can be blocked with internal power. However, such a large stone is also powerless to resist. Many guards have been injured by mountain rocks. King Zhe said, everyone, go up the mountain. He protected Enfupe and retreated up the mountain slope. Other guards also support each other and follow closely behind. Fortunately, everyone was equipped with martial arts skills, rushing left and right, dodging rocks and slowly advancing up the mountain. In late autumn, the thick withered leaves in the forest rustle underfoot. King Zhe and Enfupe broke into the apricot grove, and the soldiers brought by Kai Siyuan were in dire straits. Previously, they followed Kai Siyuan's orders and fought against the guards of King Zhe, either seriously injured or knocked out. The rocks rolled down the mountain, and they were unable to escape. Some were hit in the head by a boulder, causing their brains to shatter. Some were scratched in the stomach by sharp stones, and their intestines flew out. As for broken hands and feet, plasma splatters are countless. Their commander, the lord of Xuanyang City, Kai Siyuan, immediately climbed the mountain slope and looked at this tragic scene of the human world. For some reason, he felt a sense of control over the fate of the world and a sense of universal response. He waved his hand and shouted, push all the infected people down. As soon as Kai Siyuan's instructions were issued, several personal soldiers sent orders to the disaster victims, spreading 10 to 10, and quickly spreading throughout the entire apricot grove. During the pursuit of Enfupe by Kai Siyuan, the disaster victims were accompanied by a group of people with rash, fever, and epidemic. They were waiting for this moment when they pushed them out one by one. The sky is already completely bright. But it was a very cloudy day, and the heavy clouds weighed down, making it difficult for people to catch their breath. The apricot grove was bustling with people, and the cries were deafening. People infected with the epidemic may be sickly, but they are all living beings. My son, I have gone through countless hardships for my mother, pulling you into adulthood with a bunch of feces and urine. Do you really have the heart to kill your mother like this? One of the elderly women tightly held on to her son's hand, but was mercilessly pushed away. Several disaster victims grabbed her, lifted her withered body, and threw it down the mountain. The old woman was already old, but when she was thrown from a high mountain, half of her old bone was broken. Before she could cry, the roaring rocks covered her body. A weak child who has been infected with the epidemic again loudly calls for help to his parents, Mom. Dad. The child doesn't want to die. Help the child. The cries were drowned in the scolding of everyone. The little children were also left in the valley, their childish figures running and escaping below, but the stones that flew towards them did not have eyes and hit them hard one by one. There is also a family where the pillar of the roof has been infected with the epidemic, and his wife, children, elderly mother, and parents hold him and cry together. My husband, you are in your prime. If you die and leave me as an orphan and widowed mother, how can you survive? My son, you're only in your 30s this year, in your prime, why did you get infected with the epidemic? What's the point of leaving me alone and living? Oh my goodness, why isn't the person who got infected with the epidemic an old lady like me? But there was no chance, even though this person's body was still strong, it could not withstand the large number of disaster victims and was forcibly abandoned from the mountain. There was even a pregnant woman with a big belly, pitifully crying and begging for mercy on her knees. Big brother, please hold up your hand. My baby is already in August and I'm about to give birth. If I die, my fetus won't be able to live either. However, no one sympathized with her, and she was still lifted up by her limbs and thrown down from the mountain. The pregnant woman felt a throbbing pain while holding her stomach, and there was bleeding from underneath, afraid that she might have a miscarriage. You have a young life. And Fu-Pei saw it and didn't want to give the flower red to King Zhe. It was a professional reaction and he turned around and flew towards the pregnant woman. Bang! Bang! The stones kept flying down from above, and Fu-Pei's figure shook. He avoided the stones, picked up the pregnant woman, and ran into the forest, hiding behind a tall apricot tree. The pregnant woman stroked her high and bulging belly with her hands, her lower body moist, and tears filled her face. My child, if you leave my mother, she won't live anymore. She bumped into an apricot tree, her head covered in blood. The only few withered leaves left on the tree fell down and touched her bloody forehead. Fu-Pei took out the fetal heart rate monitor from the spatial bracelet and pressed it onto the pregnant woman's belly. The fetal heartbeat is clear and loud. Sister, your child is still alive, listen. The pregnant woman was both surprised and delighted, really. Really, please persevere and strive to give birth to him. He is a human life, Fu-Pei advised calmly. The blood and tears streaming down her face were mixed together. King Zhe saw Fu-Pei almost being stoned several times from a high place, and was somewhat worried about her. He stuffed Hua Hong into Xiao Xi's hand and ran down the mountain slope. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Apricot Forest Delivery. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Apricot Forest Delivery. Fu-Pei saw King Zhe rushing towards him and exclaimed, "Catch the thief first." The words make sense, said King Zhe, pausing in his footsteps and pondering. He looked up at the hillside and saw Kai Siyuan standing on it like a ruler, reciting something. The great river is flowing eastward, with mud and sand falling, the waves are magnificent, beautiful and strong, majestic and fierce. Zhe Wang rushed to the hillside and punched Kai Siyuan's face. Kai and Yuan's buttocks are blocked. Ka. The fist collided with the arm, and a huge pain hit the hand of King Zhe. The huge impact caught King Zhe off guard and he fell back. King Zhe was extremely shocked. How could Kai Siyuan, a scholar, have such inner strength? It was his carelessness that he underestimated the enemy. Kai Siyuan sat safely on the horse, feeling proud. I am both civil and military. Suddenly, a baby cry came from the foot of the mountain. Fu-Pei safely delivered the child. The baby cried loudly, but it was a very healthy baby. Fu-Pei delivered the pregnant woman, cut the umbilical cord, roughly wiped the amniotic fluid on the baby girl's body, cut a section of the skirt hem from her own skirt and wrapped the baby girl around it. After giving birth, the woman's spirit was half drained, and her face was covered in blood and tears as she entrusted her last words, "I didn't expect to encounter such a disaster in this life. She was infected with the epidemic and almost buried her unborn child with me. Kind-hearted person, please help me raise her. I'm going, and I'll repay your great kindness in the next life." After the mother finished speaking, she turned her head and bumped into the tree. Nfupe quickly grabbed her elbow and said, "What are you doing? You take care of your own children, I don't know how to take care of them." The mother's tears flowed down her face as she said, "I have been infected with the epidemic. Whether I die of illness or am buried alive, I can't escape the word death. Kind-hearted person, please do me a favor, I will definitely repay you in the next life." She got up, squatted on the ground, kowtowed to Nfupe until her face was covered in soil and dead leaves. Originally, the mother was scared by being buried alive. Nfupe furrowed her brows and said, "Who said that if you get infected with the epidemic, you will die? It's just a minor illness." In the post-apocalyptic zombie era, this epidemic is called bullous pneumococcal infection, which is just a common disease that can be treated symptomatically with medication. Nfupe is an apocalyptic divine doctor, and she has spare medicines stored in her space bracelet. She took out a medicine bottle and poured out a pill. "After taking this medicine, you will recover." The mother looked up and stared blankly. "Medicine? Can this medicine cure my epidemic?" "You can eat it." Nfupe directly inserted the pill into the mother's mouth, pinched her jaw, and the mother couldn't help but swallow the pill into her abdomen. Tai Song saw that the mother had finished giving birth and received several guards to assist in taking the mother and baby up the mountain to avoid the rocks. The group paused and rested in a safer area on the mountainside. At this time, the apricot grove has become a hell on earth. Those who were infected with the epidemic were thrown down the mountain one by one. The sound of crying shook the sky. There are those who cry, but there are also those who laugh. "Ha ha ha, Wang Lao Han, you also have today. Do you remember last winter, I proposed marriage to your girl with 1 liter and 3 dough of rice, but you refused. God has eyes on you, calling you infected with the epidemic. Third sister, you medicine jar. If it weren't for your constant illness and medication, would our family have gone from being a well-off family to a poor one? Fortunately, you have contracted the epidemic this time. Go die early and get rid of it." These people have had conflicts with each other in their daily lives. At this time, one side has contracted the epidemic, and the other side takes the opportunity to seek revenge. Even some people who have not been infected with the epidemic have been dragged out. "Let go of me. What are you doing? I haven't been infected with the epidemic." An old man with white beard struggled desperately under the hands of a strong man. "Dad, last year when I was young and broke, I borrowed some rice from you. You little tool ghost refused, causing my son to starve to death." The strong man directly pressed the old man's head and knocked him onto the tree, causing him to bleed. "But I don't have enough food at home either. If I give you rice, then I—" The old man was rudely thrown down the mountain before he could finish speaking. The strong man thrust his waist and roared up to the sky, "My son, I have avenged you for my father." On the other side, a young and weak scholar was wrapped in a burlap and thrown down the mountain, grabbing his limbs. This Li Xianzhua always comes first in every exam, and the teacher praises him in front of us every day, which is really annoying. There was another burly man with a majestic figure who was grabbed and beaten by 7 or 8 people. A wealthy young master commanded from the side and spat at him. "Dong Wei Quan, you poor ghost, why did you marry such a beautiful woman as Ailin? You refuse to give it to me even if I kill you this time. Ha ha ha." The apricot forest is in chaos, like a pot of porridge. Wild echoes echoed in the mountains and forests. The autumn wind picks up the fallen leaves in the forest, churning up and down. The people were plunged into a state of panic and excitement, as if they had collectively taken medicine and enjoyed the excitement brought by the slaughter. King Zhe was slapped by Kai Siyuan. But Kai Siyuan still sat comfortably on the horse, holding on to Yi Xier. Guard Xiaoqi flew up the mountain to assist King Zhe, but was slapped in the chest by Kai Siyuan, who spat out a large mouthful of blood and rolled down the mountain slope. Kai Siyuan sneered, his narrow phoenix eyes narrowed, and Xian felt proud. Xier, the ancient elixir you gave me is indeed effective, saving me 30 years of cultivation. Only then did King Zhe realize that Kai Siyuan had divine power because he had eaten genetic preparations from ancient relics. Those preparations have been buried underground for billions of years, and the holy organization unanimously believes that they may have deteriorated, with an unknown possibility of harm to the human body, and their use is prohibited. Otherwise, how much genetic preparation does Zhuang need? Tai Song and several guards quickly wielded their swords and bravely fought against Kai Siyuan. These guards are all extremely young, although their martial arts are far superior to Kai Siyuan's, their internal power cultivation is not as good as Kai Siyuan's. Kai Siyuan had never practiced martial arts and relied solely on a drop of genetic preparation to gain immense divine power. Without proper organization, he slapped Tai Song in the face of his assassin, leaving him unable to resist. When Tai Song and his companions were tightly suppressed by Kai Siyuan and unable to break through, a figure suddenly darted from bottom to top in front of everyone, like an eagle, flapping its wings and knocking Kai Siyuan off his horse. Along with Yi Xier, they also rolled down to the ground. The guards were stunned, and upon closer inspection, they realized that the person was Fu Pei. Fu Pei shot Kai Siyuan off her horse with one move. She turned over and suppressed Kai Siyuan, controlled him, and wrapped her hands around his neck, shouting, "Those surnamed Kai. Tell the people to stop." Xiaoxi had just climbed back from the slope, and when she saw this scene, her mouth couldn't close or open. "Oh my goodness, King Zhe, her martial arts are better than you. You won't be able to save the beauty of heroes in the future." King Zhe leaned against an apricot tree, his peach blossom eyes curved with a smile. Very good, very good. If I dress up, it's also quite beautiful," he said, cough, cough. Xiaoxi let out a string of coughs. When did his prince become so sickly? Xiaoxi can't look directly at his family prince anymore. End of this chapter.